flow at a particular stream gauge. You can use different statistics based on this data, such as the median flow or the Q50 flow, as hydrologists describe it. Low flow values, the magnitude of flow that occurs 99% of the time, 90% of the time, 80% of the time. Various metrics of flow variability and all sorts of things. I bring that little description forward to describe what is happening in Honokohau. The green line, if you can see it above, is the 1986 to 2005 data set in Honokohau. And this is high flows on the left, low flows on the right. The median flow, or the one in the middle, is at the 50. The purple line is the 2006 to 2025, up to last week. You can see the purple line continues to remain below the green line. We have less water. Depending on the metric you use, such as mean daily flow, we have 11.5% less water. Median flow, we have 17.4% less water, just in the last 20 years compared to the previous 20 years. Base flow, 25% less water. And then the average 14-day low flow, about 16% less water. These are not inconsequential. There's less water. A lot of this is because of reduced availability. A little too late. Reduced rainfall. As depicted in a number of studies through the University of Hawaii, West Maui is receiving less rainfall. Less rainfall means reduced runoff and recharge, and reduced stream flow, reduced basal aquifer recharge. Oh, sorry. So where are we monitoring stream flow outside of Honokohau? We're monitoring downstream. This is the Honokohau Ahupua'a. Here's that station I was just describing, the Century Station. We're monitoring downstream. We're monitoring at Honolua, Honokauai, Kahoma, at Mihinihina, and Kaula, multiple places, Olowalu, multiple places, Ukumehalami, in multiple places. So we're tracking these low flow conditions all across West Maui. I just want to describe again that there are multiple systems that all depend on groundwater and or surface water to meet demands. Maui DWS system meets about 94% domestic demand. And then this is a quick diagram of the interrelationship between Honokohau ditch water and the other surface water systems north of Kahoma Stream. So this is Kahoma right here. And I will pass it to groundwater.
Thank you, Aaron. Oh, is this on?
I can't turn it off.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a summary of groundwater conditions throughout the Lahaina aquifer sector. So as you can see, the Lahaina aquifer sector is comprised of 6 aquifer systems going from north to south, and I'm going to give you a summary of data, I think going north from south. So the Honokohau aquifer system has what we call a sustainable yield of 9 million gallons per day. And usage from Honokohau we regulate on a 12-month moving average. So what does that mean? We look at the pumpage for the 12 months preceding the date that we present, and we give you data based off of the total usage for 12 months. In the case of Honokohau, we don't have any data, and so in this slide, it's not applicable. Moving southward, Honolua has a sustainable yield of 8 million gallons per day. And as you can see, the 12-month moving average of all pumpage in Honolua is 2.365 million gallons per day. Let's see. Okay, so I want to give you some selected data. Kira, is this the right order? Okay, so I want to give you some selective pumpage data, and so I'm providing this map so that you can see some of the data that we're showing. Some in Napili, I think some in Ka'anapali. And Napili C, I wanted to show you that we're observing chlorides. So what are chlorides? Chlorides are a measure of salt in the water. And so we're monitoring how salty wells get and looking at a comparison of the pumpage of the well versus the chlorides or the salinity in parts per million. So what we're seeing in the Napili C is pumpage is relatively steady, relatively uniform. That's these vertical lines here. And this orange line represents the salinity. And it looks like as pumpage, ramps up in that part of the year, salinity goes up. And then when pumpage drops, salinity goes down. But we're seeing a little bit of an upward trend here and trying to figure out why salinity is increasing as time goes on. In the Honokowai aquifer system, sustainable yield 6 million gallons per day, and the 12-month moving average is 4.381 million gallons per day. And so I'm going to show you, we're going to look at a couple of wells here. First of all, we have a deep monitor well called the Mahina Deep Monitor Well. And this is a well that our crew goes out and takes data for quarterly. And we're trying to monitor aquifer health with this monitor well. We're trying to drill a lot more monitor wells, especially in Lahaina. We want to drill one in Launiopoko. But basically, deep monitor wells tell us a couple of things. It tells us where the water level is. The water level seemed pretty stable since at least 2001. That's the top of the water level. We're looking at the top of the transition zone from fresh to salt water. It seemed relatively stable. There's a strange anomaly here. This might have been some equipment issues, but so ignore that dash line coming up. But looking at since about 2013, the top of the transition zone has been relatively stable. This red line is the midpoint of the transition zone. And so this is the midpoint of the transition from fresh to salt water. And we're seeing this have a slight rise, but it's possible that it's trying to attain an equilibrium position right about here. And then this is the bottom of the transition zone from fresh to salt water, and we're starting to see this rise too. So this does cause us a little bit of concern because this kind of addresses what the overall aquifer health is. I'm going to show you again, like similar to that previous slide, this is a comparison of pumpage versus chlorides, and we're starting to see chlorides in Ka'anapali P1 start to increase steadily over time. If you look at a trend line, it's kind of trending upwards like this. Ka'anapali P2, I'm not sure if we have a trend, necessarily a trend line, because as you can see, the pumpage really increased throughout 2024, and salinity matched, the pumpage. Salinity increased in accordance with higher pumpage. Here's an example of relatively steady pumpage and steadily increasing salinity. So this does cause us a little bit of concern. Similarly, for Ka'anapali P5A, we're seeing relatively steady pumpage and pretty significant increases in salinity. And then this is data for Ka'anapali P6, which again kind of follows salinity follows pumpage pretty closely. And I think this is the last one, Hahakea 2. Shows it looks like an upward trend in salinity here too. So all of these are indicators that maybe the amount of quantity being pumped might not be sustainable. Now I'll go over some data for Launiopoko. So Launiopoko has a sustainable yield of 7 million gallons per day. And And pumpage on a 12-month moving average is 1.205 million gallons per day. So not a huge percentage of sustainable yield. Olowalu has very little pumpage. The sustainable yield's 2 million gallons per day, and pumpage is about 0.366 million gallons per day. And then finally, Ukumehame has a sustainable yield of 2 million gallons per day, and the 12-month moving average throughout December of last year is 0.074 million gallons per day. Now I'll turn it back over to Aaron. Kira? For the Olowalu, I don't have data available, but I don't think we're too concerned about salinity there. Thank you.
I think the slide is wrong. Maybe. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about the water use permitting process a little bit. Again, I'm Kira Kahahane. I'm the Deputy Director. By the way, all of these slides are going to be posted online on our website after the presentation is over. So I know it's a little bit hard to see some of the details from here. So we'll make sure that this is posted so you can look at it at home and look more closely at some of the information. Okay, so as all of you probably know, most of West Maui was designated as both surface and groundwater management area in August 2022. And within designated water management areas, any withdrawal, impoundment, or consumptive use of water requires a water use permit. Existing use applications were due on August 7th, 2023, and of course we all know what happened on August 8th. So now that the area has been designated, we're going through a process with water use permitting, or we sometimes will just refer to these by the acronym WUP. These can be for ground or for surface water. It identifies basically the quantity of water for each use, and it has to go through an analysis of what alternatives are available. So if you're looking for groundwater, is there surface water available that you can use, and vice versa. It's applicable to all water users, county and private, with some exceptions, catchment and individual domestic uses. Also up here is an exception for traditional and customary practices. I didn't put that on the slide, but so this is an image of what one of our water use permit applications looks like. Sometimes we call these WUPA for short. So that's a groundwater use permit application. Some of you might have already filled these out. And it requires some information, your name and address, the date, the water source, the quantity and the quality of the water that you're requesting, the use of water, any limitations, the location of the use, and the location of the well or the diversion that you're getting water from. And there are a lot of conditions attached to these water use permits. They have to be able to be accommodated with the available source. So you just saw some information about pumpage versus sustainable yield. If there's not enough water in the aquifer to meet the water use permit application, of course that comes into our analysis. The use has to be reasonable and beneficial. So staff has to look at it and assess whether the use that you're proposing to use the water for meets that reasonable and beneficial balance. It can't interfere with any existing legal use of water. It has to be consistent with the public interest. It has to be consistent with state and county general plans and land use designations. And we have two different kinds of uses, existing and new uses. So existing uses are the ones that existed on the time of designation. So on the date of designation, which uses were existing at the time. The rules for existing use applications, they can't compete with another existing use of water. And if two or more existing use applications compete with each other for the same water, the commission needs to hold a hearing to decide the quantity of water that each gets and the conditions that are going to be attached. For new uses, if two applications compete or conflict, again, the commission has to try to accommodate both. And if that's not possible, then the commission approves the one that best serves the public interest. So as we're going through this water use permitting process, here's basically what it looks like. There's public notice. When we receive a complete application and accept it, a notice goes out. It goes out in the newspaper. It'll be on our bulletin. It'll be posted on our website. People will have the opportunity to look at that application and to object to it. There's a public hearing that we have to hold if an objection is received. And there also has to be an alternatives analysis, like I've mentioned. The water use permit can't interfere with DHHL's reservations of water, and it has to include a kapa'akai analysis, which is an assessment of the impact that that use of water would have on traditional and customary practices of Native Hawaiians. It also has to be allowed under the common law of the state of Hawaii. So, if we do end up holding a public hearing, it's under Chapter 91 HRS. It's called Hawaii Administrative Procedures Act. And we have to follow procedural rules of due process. So there has to be a record. We have to do findings of fact and conclusions of law. The commission staff, or the commission itself and a hearings officer, if we appoint one, is basically acting like a judge in this context. So it can involve discovery, cross-examination, we can have witnesses, even site visits throughout this process. The commission ultimately decides whether or not to accept those findings of fact and conclusions of law, and they make a decision. And that decision can be appealed directly to the Hawaii Supreme Court. This process is long. I mean, it can take a long time, it can be difficult for everyone who's involved. And because of that, we're going to be encouraging alternative dispute resolution or mediation if an objection is filed. And so it's important that we try at least to work out these differences in a cooperative way before we proceed to going through this full sort of kind of court process to work out the divisions and who's going to get what. So here I have kind of a timeline of what this might look like depending on what happens. So right now we're at that first box, this first phase, coming up with proposed staff decisions on permit applications. We haven't yet published public notice related to those applications. So if objections are filed, then we'll go to mediation. If mediation is successful, great. We'll issue a permit or maybe modify the permit subject to commission approval. If mediation fails, we're going to end up, going to a formal contested case hearing through the process that I just mentioned. If no objections are filed, then we are free to issue a permit which might be modified or denied when it goes to the full commission. And they're going to make that decision in public.
How much time is it to object?
10 days after the application is posted, after the last posting in the newspaper. And then there's 10 more days for people to file in support of the permit application. So here are the applications that we've received for surface water, SWUPAs as we call them, by hydrologic unit. So as you can see, by far we have the most in Honokohau, both existing and new use applications. A lot of these are for traditional customary practices and appurtenant rights, which are protected as a public trust under the Water Code. So we're going to try to hustle on those as much as we can, not keep people waiting. So some of these numbers, so here's the groundwater use permits, broken out by hydrologic unit. So the most is Launiupoko and then Honokowai. We've sent letters out regarding some of the water use applications for Honokowai, meaning that some people's applications we had questions about. We've asked those questions. We're waiting on people to provide us some more information about their applications so that we can decide whether or not we're ready to accept them. These numbers are a little bit deceiving because a lot of these applications are for multiple parcels, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of parcels that are all on the same system. So we look at the uses on all of them, and it takes a while. So here's some of the information that we commonly find missing as staff. Incorrect source. The application's not legible, cannot read it, it's missing pages. The requested water quantities are inconsistent between the boxes or they're missing. There's no alternatives analysis, so people haven't looked into, what alternatives might be present in their area to fulfill their water needs. The amount of the existing use that's being applied for doesn't match the actual use that appears to be existing on the parcel. Or the well and stream diversion that they're trying to get water from was not properly permitted in the first place. So these are some of the things that are coming up in applications that we're working through. These are things that we're documenting in letters and sending out to the applicant. So, we're still working on a framework, and we're going to be discussing it with, stakeholders like your elected representatives to try to figure out how are we going to take all of this information, all of these water use permit applications, prioritize which ones we're going to act on first, go through the analysis, and I'm not ready to propose the specific tiers yet, but we do have preliminary information on what we're thinking. So we've already announced that we're going to begin with Honokowai groundwater management area and Honokohau surface water management area. And a lot of the reason for that is just the amount of use that is on those systems and the fact that Honokowai supplies a lot of the water that is used in town. We're proposing to use a tiered framework to prioritize and expedite public trust uses and affordable housing. So the public trust uses, I don't think I mentioned them specifically, but they're maintenance of water in its natural state, which means, the environment itself. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands making sure that they have adequate water. Domestic use, and traditional and customary practices. So the traditional and customary practices also includes appurtenant rights. That's kind of related because those are rights that went with Kuleana parcels when they were first issued as land commission awards. And so what we're proposing is basically to kind of create these tiers that will allow us to get through some of the applications in a more timely fashion instead of looking at them all at once. So we're discussing the tiers internally, and I'm going to be discussing it. We're going to be ready to announce this as a draft for public comment this summer. Trying to balance moving quickly with making sure that we weigh the very, very important interests at play with water. It's, of course, our most precious resource, and so I'm trying to make sure that we do it right and involve the community and engage you and get your comments on what those tiers are going to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neil to talk about how we're re-evaluating the sustainable yields for Lahaina.
Thank you, Kira. Neil Fujii. I'm with the Planning Branch at the Water Commission. So like Kira said, I'm going to kind of go a quick overview of some of the sustainable yields and how we are thinking of re-evaluating them. So why are we doing this? So as Kira mentioned, and you all know, the Commission designated Lahaina as a ground and surface water management area in 2022. The USGS released its new estimates of future recharge. So having that information available now to us, as well as trying to find out how much water there is in Lahaina for current and future uses. So that's the main purpose of doing the reevaluation. The Commission is focusing on Lahaina currently, prioritize Lahaina, but we are planning also to take this out across the state, depending on our priorities and resources. Okay, this is going to be a review. So the Commission manages its groundwater by aquifer units. And the larger division is called the aquifer sector area, so Lahaina. That on the Lahaina side, that blue color there, that's the Lahaina aquifer sector area. And then the smaller divisions, like Ryan mentioned and Aaron, is the aquifer system. So we got 6, yeah? They're different aquifer systems. So the way the Commission manages groundwater is through its sustainable yield or estimates of sustainable yield. How much water can be withdrawn from that aquifer without harming the resource, right? Okay, so according to the State Water Code, sustainable yield, and I'll read it to you because it's not that long. Sustainable yield means the maximum rate at which water may be withdrawn from the water source without impairing the utility or quality of the water source as determined by the commission. So the two kind of the key words here is impairing or impairment, and then is as determined by the commission. So it's really what the commission determines is acceptable, right? The sustainable yield does set the limit of how much water you can develop from the aquifer, from the groundwater. So it's an important management tool saying how much you can take out of the aquifer and what you have to leave inside the aquifer for other, TNC purposes, GDE purposes, right? The commission currently uses, you guys probably all heard of this, robust analytical model to estimate sustainable yields. There's RAM2, which is a bit of a modified robust analytical model, and we use that in some aquifer systems across the state. Just real quickly comparing, I'll just talk about these two methods of estimating sustainable yield, right? Call it the RAM model, the analytical model, and then there's numerical models, right? So some hydrologists and others believe that the RAM model is, it's kind of out of date and doesn't have too much utility. It's kind of, not adequate, especially because the proliferation of numerical models and the computing power we have nowadays. So, these numerical models are really powerful tools that, people can use to simulate what's going on under the ground, right? But it also, Okay, so Aaron talked about some of this. I'll go over really quickly. So there is some caprock in Lahaina, a little bit, but so you have caprock down Mauka, which is kind of by the shore. It's made up of sedimentary deposits, and then you have the basalt, which is kind of onshore and inland, and then you have the dike system up Mauka. The caprock is a barrier which kind of holds back the fresh water from easily going into the ocean. And then you also have in the dike system of Mauka, the dikes provide a barrier, so it builds up water behind that. And that dike, sorry. And then, so dikes are also barriers. What happening, the main thing to remember is water flows from high to low hydraulic head or pressure, but basically it goes from higher elevation to lower elevation, but it also depends on the different pressure, yeah? Okay, we cannot talk about groundwater unless we talk about streams, which Aaron covered, so this is just really quickly what Aaron, I just want to kind of remind there, most of the streams are losing streams, which means as the stream is flowing towards the ocean, the water seeps into the ground or percolates into the ground, recharging the aquifer. So if you let's say, increase the stream flow or restore the streams, you would probably recharge the aquifer where the stream is going through. Okay, so talked a little about this and a little bit more about estimating sustainable yield. Recharge is how much water from rain and other sources make it into the aquifer, right? That's a really super important key aspect of estimating sustainable yields. So I'll talk a little bit about these two models. We talked about the RAM and the numerical modeling. Again, RAM, it's simplified and it has limitations, right? So the good things about RAM is it's rather, it's inexpensive, just requires a recharge value for each of the aquifer systems. And then you can estimate your sustainable yield based on estimated original head levels and equilibrium head, things like that. Some of the drawbacks, there's a lot of assumptions in RAM because it's super simple. So it assumes a uniform aquifer, doesn't take into account the spatial distribution of withdrawals or where the wells are, how deep the wells are, how the recharge is occurring throughout the aquifer, right? So it doesn't take all that into account, the different gradations in recharge and withdrawal. And then it cannot assess what the impacts are to the traditional and customary practices, right? And the groundwater dependent ecosystems. The numerical models, again, I mentioned super powerful tool, helps the commission, it could help you to determine how much water you can withdraw at certain points. It doesn't really give you a number, a sustainable yield, really, because you can vary all the different variables, and these numbers will be all over the place. But the good thing is, it does account for complex geology, hydrogeology, provides, you can simulate flows under the ground with the computer, right? And you can do multiple scenarios of recharge and withdrawals, and you can run this pumping out 30 years into the future, which is pretty amazing. And it's going to be an estimate or simulation, but that's what numerical models allow you to do. Some of the bad things or cons about it is, it, again, doesn't provide a value. It's pretty expensive. It's time consuming. Takes maybe a couple, 3 years, usually. And then, you have to build your model based on what you think is under the ground or what the wells tell you, like what the aquifer properties are, where the different rocks are, different geology and things like that. So we don't have a whole lot of that, but so scientists do some good estimates, so they can estimate that. Okay, just a reminder, the sustainable yield, the commission, if you look at the definition, the commission can base the sustainable yield on what's an acceptable impact to the resource. Okay, so the commission, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, so there's a number of resources and scientific papers and in the literature. I'll mention a couple. In 2012, the Maui Water Department did, let's call this the Lahaina numerical model. So they developed that water department with the USGS, and they simulated different pumping in different wells based on certain types of recharge, and looking at how the pumping of these wells will affect the salinity or how much salinity of water is in the wells, and also simulated what's happening with the aquifer lens and the transition zone, so it'll do all of that. The only one thing is that the one thing that's maybe limiting is this particular model looked at the entire aquifer Lahaina sector and not the individual aquifer systems. So in that way, it doesn't quite give you what you want in each aquifer system area. I mentioned USGS estimated groundwater recharge released last year. And then the USGS is working with Water Department to do an ongoing study of aquifers on Maui, including the 4 north aquifers in Lahaina, so all except Olowalu and Ukume'ame. And then, there's relevant, we're looking for GDE studies, groundwater dependent ecosystem studies in the area so that we can get information from that. And then, of course, last but not least, a great resource, and we're hoping that we can tap into that is, the indigenous or traditional ecologic knowledge, or kilo, right? So observations, from the native Hawaiians that have been going on for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, yeah? Okay, process for reevaluation. I'll go over really quickly. The commission, when we do update sustainable yields, which we've done at least twice in the past since 1990, we've convened these what we call water professional. They're mainly comprised of hydrologists, and in this case, some officials from the Maui Water Department, because they did that Lahaina model in 2012. And the purpose is to come up with, talk to these hydrologists and find out, get their opinion on what's the best approach to reevaluating sustainable yield in Lahaina. We also want to, we haven't done it yet, is meet with the traditional and customary practitioners from the area. We want to learn what types of practices and where these occur to help us understand how possibly groundwater can affect that, or groundwater flow at the coast or offshore can affect those. We also want to meet with kind of the experts in the groundwater, the GDE, groundwater dependent ecosystem. So we have some academics I know that do studies like that. We plan to meet, sometime in May, hopefully, next month. And then after meeting with this second group, we hope to combine the hydrologists with the GDE experts and the practitioners to come up, discuss this reevaluation and what's the best way we can come up with if we change the sustainable yield. So if we decide to change it, I have a slide on what it is now and some based on different recharge estimates using RAM. But if that's necessary, or if the staff recommends it, we need to come to the Water Commission to get their approval on an action item if we want to revise the sustainable yield, right? And then, we also want to talk about whether or not we do change sustainable yield, what kind of additional monitoring can be done, and, can we refine some of these models to get a better understanding, including numerical models, right? So when I talking about monitoring, not only monitoring the wells and the groundwater and the streams, monitoring of the ocean maybe, of the organisms, and so what's happening in the coastal and nearshore waters. Okay, this is really hard to see, and I apologize. But the commission right now, the sustainable yield in Lahaina is pretty low. I'll say, based on all of this information, with the commission, our policy in setting sustainable yield, and there's a number of different recharge scenarios. Commission's policy is to always choose the lowest recharge, right? Lowest recharge, plug them into the RAM analytical model to get the sustainable yield. Our policy is also to, if there's a deep monitor well in the aquifer, or if there's a numerical model available, then the commission, the staff can recommend, well, we might change it. We might select a sustainable yield that's higher than what it is, right? Higher than the lowest. So this is really hard to see, but back in 1990, the original setting of sustainable yield, John Mink had estimates of recharge in Lahaina. This is, the number you want to look at is 73 million gallons a day across the entire Lahaina sector, right? Of recharge, water making it into the ground. So based on that, the commission set sustainable yield, the total for Lahaina for 40, right? 40 MGD for the entire Lahaina sector. When we revised the Water Resource Protection Plan in 2019, the staff went over some of the calculations, and we did notice, there were some discrepancies. So the commission actually reduced sustainable yield in Lahaina for every aquifer system except one, except for Honolulu, I think. Yep. And then, so now it's 34, right? That's the lowest. We didn't go with a higher one because we have a numerical model, or we have a deep monitor well, which we have both. But so we talked about the USGS recharge estimates, their report dated in 2023. We came out of a number of scenarios, you guys might know. Right now, what they call the baseline, it's hard to see over there, is that 68 million gallons. This is the sustainable yield if we just apply RAM. So the recharge is hard to see. It's 150 million gallons per day compared to John Mink's number of 73, right? And this is what they call the baseline, 1974 to 1974 to 2005 or something like that, 30-year period baseline. They also USGS looked at this dry scenario based on global climate models and different types of rainfall estimates into the future, end of century. The dry scenario, 114 million gallons of recharge. If we use RAM, we get 52 MGD of sustainable yield. It's still above the 34, right? So I guess what I'm saying is right now we have a very conservative, if that's the word, taking the low end of recharge. It's really precautionary principle in Lahaina and across the state. But everybody talks about these recharge numbers. What's going to happen? Is the sustainability going to go down? Well, if we actually continue to use RAM and we use this dry scenario, USGS estimates, sustainable yields would go up, right? So anyway, just putting it into perspective, this last, sorry, I'm over 12 minutes, but this last slide just kind of shows, this is, again, hard to see. We have this presentation on our website, but these are all the different, every what is this, column from about, the sixth one over is different recharge estimates done by the USGS, right? And based on, different land cover, land use, different evapotranspiration, different rainfall scenarios, but there's a whole lot of work has been done across the state and in Lahaina to show you how much, the variation of the estimates of recharge, right? Can we tell the future? I don't know, maybe. But USGS recharge is looking into the future, trying to see what's gonna happen 50, 100 years, no, not 100 years from now, up to the end of this century, right? So anyway, just gotta be cautious about that. That's my last slide. And I'm back to Kira.
Okay, this is almost the end. One of the items, the only action item that's going to be on our commission agenda on April 28th is going to be regarding a new water source that Maui Department of Water Supply wants to start using. It's called Kahana Well. The purpose is to allow let me start. It's a request for a declaratory ruling by the commission, which is it allows the commission to make a decision clarifying the law or allowing, ordering a certain form of relief. So this is a request for a declaratory ruling by the Department of Water Supply. The purpose is to allow the Kahana Well to be used to provide reliable capacity to serve existing uses in Lahaina, including temporary housing and rebuilding burned structures until their water use permit application is acted on. So we received a draft copy of their request, and like I said, it's going to be heard by the commission on April 28th. So because this is Maui Department of Water Supply's request, I'm going to direct you to a lot of the information that they provided on this. They've given a presentation on it on March 19th as part of the Maui Recovers meetings. I have the links in the recording here. You can go to the Maui Recovers website and look at their recorded webinars for March 19th, and it's there. So folks from the Maui Department of Water Supply gave a briefing on it. There's a map and some visuals to kind of help you get a sense of what Kahana Well is for. You saw that Honokohau stream is very dry. So this is supposed to give some reliable capacity to the water department so they can provide water to folks in Lahaina town. Of course, nothing is decided yet. It's an action item. So if you have thoughts on this and if you want to provide testimony, we certainly look forward to seeing you on April 28th at the Lahaina Civic Center. So finally, before we open it up for questions, I'm just going to remind everyone, April 28th, commission meeting, 9:30 a.m., Lahaina Civic Center. You can join us via Zoom too. The agenda and the submittals for it are going to be posted at least a week in advance so you can read through everything. You can read through this Kahana Well declaratory, request for a declaratory ruling, and see what you think, okay? So finally, I'm going to open it up to questions. We're going to take a couple written questions that we have already. And I'm going to ask staff to join me up here so we can go through some of these. I'll read them and you can answer. How's that? Okay. The first question we got, and if you have a question on a card, just raise your hand, and Dean will come get it. Okay. First question. You want me to take it into different parts? Okay. Number one, three-part question. Define the meaning of an aquifer according to the commission.
Okay, an aquifer is a structure or multiple structures of permeable rock that contain and transmit groundwater.
Yeah. You might not be ready for this. How do you determine where those aquifer boundaries are? That's not on the card. That's a question from me.
Wait, hey Neil, the aquifer boundary.
What point is it? Why do you think there's 6?
How do you define the aquifer boundaries?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, so question about how were the delineations were made. So it was adopted in the 1990 Water Resource Protection Plan. It was John Mink and other geologists, hydrologists that came up with that aquifer, the scheme of the delineations and the names, right? And it's also in combination with the Department of Health, because Department of Health is also concerned with threats to the aquifer. So it was, I think, through also University of Hawaii Water Resource Research Center. Hope that answers the question.
What's your question? Oh, and then the third, I think there's a third question.
Okay, part 2 of this question. How many aquifers are there on Maui?
Let's see, do you, should that be slide?
Sure.
Oh, no. There, let's see, it's right there. Yeah. Okay, so on Maui, we have 6 aquifer sectors. So if you look at the map, the different colors represent the different aquifer sectors. So they're basically groupings of aquifer systems. In total, throughout the island, there are 25 aquifer systems. So you see the dashed lines between the colored areas are the aquifer systems.
And you can find this on our website anytime you want to look at it. Would any damage to the aquifer affect the whole island?
So the question is if damage to one aquifer would affect the whole island. Generally, if there's damage to one aquifer, it may directly impact adjacent aquifers, but probably not non-adjacent aquifers. But if damage to one aquifer, damage to one aquifer could indirectly affect other aquifers if the water system is continuous and they decide to pump from other aquifers more to compensate for that.
We have that one about recharge.
Oh yeah, Neil.
So we got a question about groundwater recharge. Do you want to talk about how we estimate groundwater recharge?
Sure. What's the question exactly? There's no groundwater recharge. Oh, okay. That's so groundwater. When we talked about the commission using the groundwater recharge to do sustainable yield estimates. That's basically how much water from rainfall, from streams leaking into the aquifers, cesspools, even reservoirs. How much of that water, atmospheric water as well as water bodies, make it into the aquifer. So lately, like 30, 40 years ago, it was really not a super complex method, but currently how USGS does it, they have these recharge models. So they'll take what the land cover is, right? Is it agriculture? Is it plantation? Is it homes, right? Different land cover or land use, they call it. They look at the forested area, what kind of plants are in the area, what's the evapotranspiration for these different areas. They'll take that into account. A whole bunch of factors, what the soil types, and then one of the more important is what is the rainfall? So what's the estimated rainfall? So they plug this into their fancy recharge model. This is the USGS, and they come up with these different numbers, and they delineate them. Because we use aquifer systems to manage water, they'll delineate them by the aquifer system. Hope that answers that question. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. That's okay.
Well, you guys just like sit.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of hang on here.
Okay. If salinity is increasing in our groundwater, does that indicate that we have overestimated sustainable yield? Fantastic question.
Yeah, that actually is possible and is the reason why we are increasing our monitoring of groundwater to make sure that that helps feed us into where we should recalculate sustainable yield. Increasing salinity could be maybe a localized effect that might be attributed to heavy pumpage in one area, or as the question kind of alludes to, it could be aquifer-wide. So we're monitoring the data to try to figure that out.
Okay, next question, also a really good question. What percentage of water in West Maui is used for the community domestic use versus hotels and golf course / landscaping? We don't have an answer to that question today, don't have that data with us, but we can post an answer to this on our website once we get that information together, and we can make that available publicly on our website. Okay, next question. Are swimming pools and landscaping considered beneficial use? That reasonable beneficial analysis is made on a case-by-case basis by the commission. Highly likely that some of it will be cut back. That's just the reality of the situation when we're talking about limited water resources. But we don't know yet. It's going to have to go to the commission for decision making, and staff is going to have to go through the alternatives analysis and all of those other things that I described. If it's identified that if that is identified as a large user on a water use permit in an area with increasing salinity or insufficient flow, how is that handled? Again, this is all going to be on a case-by-case basis, but like I said, we only have so much water to go around. That's just the reality of the situation. So it's very likely that, we're going to have to prioritize. We're going to have to make these hard decisions about what to prioritize. And, swimming pools and landscaping, it's possible that we're going to have to cut back on some of that. Okay, question for Aaron. Why is Ka'ua'ula Stream's IAFS currently being revised? What is the goal? Our Mulivai is flowing. Are we revisiting the idea of our stream being connected Mauka to Makai?
Great question. So the original in-stream flow standard established for Ka'ua'ula Stream was established at the 1,550-foot elevation, with the understanding that as new data is being developed, we might revise that number. That original number was based on estimates that USGS provided back in 2014. We're in a new flow reality, essentially. We've had continuous record gauging on Ka'ua'ula since 2020, and we now know there's about 50% less water available. So we just need to reflect the reality of how much water is available. Now, we want to protect as much in-stream use as possible. If that means adjusting the IFS but setting it at a slightly lower elevation so that there are more TNC practices protected, more ecosystem services protected, the Mulivai, it remains protected. We get Mauka flow from the point of the IFS down to the ocean. That's what we need to do.
Okay. What metric will be used to confirm affordable housing? Yeah, so if this is classifying into tiers, we're going to be looking at domestic use specifically. So, we at some point are going to have to assign a quantity to what's reasonable for domestic use. We haven't announced anything yet. Of course, there's no decision item on April 28th, but, we're going to have to make a decision about what is reasonable for domestic use. Confirm affordable housing. Yeah, we're going to have to talk about a specific definition of affordable housing. Is it something that got its entitlements under 201H under the state? Is it something that got entitlements under the county's affordable housing? Maybe. Those are going to be some good conversations that we're going to have over the next few months. So nothing's set in stone yet as far as what the commission itself would consider affordable. There's a lot of different definitions of affordable housing out there. Can you link all of the resources that you showed in the PowerPoint? For example, a link to the USGS 2012 report for West Maui in the slide. Yeah, I can make sure that we post that stuff on our website. Yeah, when this presentation is I'll have to go back and fix that up a little bit. Okay. If CWRM will use RAM or RAM2 to estimate sustainable yield, how will you account for the water needs of Mokuhinia? Okay, so Mokuhinia might be considered a groundwater dependent ecosystem. So ultimately, we're going to have to set our sustainable yield, and the uses that come out of it, or we might make reservations or grant water use permits that come out of it, that's going to have to be determined after we set a sustainable yield. That's all stuff that might count against sustainable yield. And just because we have a specific sustainable yield set doesn't mean we're going to go all the way up to it. How will you conduct outreach to identify traditional and customary practitioners to meet with? So a lot of it is by doing things like this, by coming out for meetings. I've been talking to a few people, like Nakupuna Lahaina, about being involved in the sustainable yield process. So I think for the most part, it's just identifying community groups and people in the community who are already out there, who have already been identified as experts, and reaching out to those people, and then getting connections from those people, and trying to find as many connections as we can to people with Ike about this place. Okay. How will you protect stream flows and watersheds on Maui? Well, the primary way that we do that is through setting in-stream flow standards. Do you want to talk more about that?
I will just mention that watersheds in general are protected by the various watershed partnerships, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, Pu'ukukui Watershed Preserve, other private entities that are doing conservation work in the Mauka lands. And then in-stream uses are protected by establishing in-stream flow standards.
Okay, number 2. How do you plan to protect water access for underserved and indigenous communities? A lot of this is going to be through protections for traditional and customary rights and for kuleana rights. Of course, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, making sure that they have adequate supplies of water, because they are an important part of our indigenous community. Requirement of our permitting process, like I showed on the board. So there needs to be a water source attached to the permit in order for us to approve it, yeah. What are your strategies for drought resilience and climate adaptation, Neil? What are your strategies for drought resilience and climate adaptation?
That's a great question. So from the commission side, the commission, we're supposed to develop a water shortage plan for all the water management areas, so that includes Lahaina. We have done one in the state. We have done one for Pearl Harbor, aquifer system on Oahu. But so one strategy is to develop a water shortage plan where the commission, if there is a water shortage and declared, can come in and prioritize the uses, do some cutbacks. And there's a bill in the legislature that's talking about water shortage and water emergency. So that's one strategy. For drought resilience and adaptation, we encourage water users, people to have water system, people who need water, to number one, conserve water. If you can, more storage, right? So storage is super important in dry times. If you can collect water in the wet times, then during the dry times, you might have some reserve, but easier said than done, right? So water conservation, water shortage planning, I'm not on Maui, but Maui can talk to their council members to beef up maybe some of the ordinances for the plumbing code, say, right? Or allowing different types of uses of recycled water in the county, yeah? So they can be maybe more. They've always been super progressive, Maui has. They got, the water shortage ordinance, they have a lot of recycled water, they got the Show Me the Water bill, all this super aggressive and progressive stuff, so maybe more of that. Plumbing code, I don't know. But those types of adaptations, trying to be more efficient with the water that we have. And then alternative uses of water, right? Looking at recycled water. Lahaina has a...
This is out in Kapalua. This Kahana well is like the next example of us. It's a little bit different because it's existing uses, but a new source for Kahana well, whereas the other declaratory ruling for temporary housing was a sort of a new use on an existing source. And that use was temporary housing. Other than that, we have not allowed anyone to bypass the water use permit application process. Okay. Next question, is water a public trust? Yes, water is a public trust resource. How can private companies hold so much power? That's a difficult question to answer. I think, a lot of it is legacy from the old days. I mean, there was a certain power structure that was set up, and it's taking a while for that structure to change. What is the commission doing to return control of water to the people? So I think designation was an example of that. We have a process now where we're going through this water use permit application process, and we're evaluating whether everything is a reasonable beneficial use, whether it's a good use of a public trust resource. Do you agree lack of regulation and state oversight failed the community? I'm not sure in what way this means, but there are probably things that could have been done differently if Lahaina was designated earlier. Yeah, I'll agree with that statement. What will you do to fix this problem? So we're going to go through this water use permitting process, and we're going to try to allocate water as best we can. We're not going to be able to fix every problem, but we'll do our best to make sure that water is allocated fairly and in accordance with the very high importance that it has as a public trust resource. Last question is on this card is, who owns the legal rights to the Kahana well? So once the Kahana well, right now, it's a Maui Department of Water Supply well. Once it receives a water use permit application, or if it receives a water use permit, then that will represent the legal right to pump that water. But I would make the distinction that all water is held in trust for the public by the state of Hawaii. And so the water from Kahana well itself belongs to all of us.
Can you revoke a water permit at any time, even if it's private?
Will you write your question on a card for me, please? We can revoke water use permits in certain circumstances. For this, it's going to be, if there is a clear evidence that there's not enough water to meet the water use permit requirements, especially if our IIFS rises or if rainfall decreases, if sustainable yields go down, then yeah, we're going to have to look back at those water use permits that we've issued. Nothing is set in stone, and so I apologize if you want certainty, but we do need to do this in a flexible way because this is an important resource that we're talking about, and the situation might change. Okay, next question. Ban all swimming pools in Lahaina. Okay, that's good testimony. Thank you. It's good to know where you stand on that, for sure. Okay, number 2, moratorium on any development until more accurate data on sustainable yield. Okay, good testimony. No new wells until sustainable yield data is accurate and not based on estimates. Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Okay, more testimony. Because of the situation we are dealing with, especially when it comes to our sorry, I can't read that. Our permitted resource, all swimming pools need to be banned and moratorium on all development. Okay. You provided a slide with a breakdown of water use by type with information provided by Maui Department of Water Supply. Do you have this information for the other water service providers in the Lahaina region? Your slide. The answer is yes, and we can post it later.
So the Maui Department of Water Supply breakdown by use is based on their categorizing their meters, and that's available in their water use and development plan. Some of that information for the private systems are used, but primarily the private systems are feeding drinking water supply and irrigation of resorts, landscaping, private homes, home developments, that sort of thing. So there's no industrial, there's a little bit of commercial, but it's primarily those other uses.
Okay. What is the per diem allocation of water to West Maui hotels per room? A recent application was requesting 550 gallons per day per room at a South Maui resort, and that is insane for visitors who are only showering. My ohana of 7 only used about 250 gallons every few days, and that included showering, dishes, and laundry. So maybe it would be good to look at current water usage for the hotel visitors and per diem per room request. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we are definitely going to have to look at that information for sure. It's only reasonable to do so. I don't think that we have this specific information ready right now, but I'll look into whether we can get that information together for you. Okay. What is the Commission's plan for recharge? So, in terms of recharge, there's not a lot that we can do by ourselves. One of the things that helps with recharge is having water flowing in the streams. We don't have jurisdiction over watersheds for things like reforestation, and we also don't have jurisdiction over things like creating new reservoirs. But these things are good. They're a good idea, and they're something that the Commission supports. So what can we do is, support that, and we try to support it, and that's providing for the needs for reforestation and things like that is definitely something that we also need to look at as we go through this process. Okay. Will there be any changes to our IIFS for Ko'uaula? And if so, why?
I did just answer this, but again, we have the original information that was available to us from 2014's USGS publication. Estimated medium flow and low flow conditions for Ko'uaula stream at the Ko'uaula ditch intake at about 1,500 feet in elevation were grossly overestimated. We now have continuous record streamflow data for this site since 2020, and we now have a much better representation of how much water is available under what timeline, per year, under drought conditions, that sort of thing. So we can more accurately determine how much water should remain in the stream based on what's naturally flowing. We also know how much water is losing in the stream once we put all the water back. That losing reach as the water exits that dike zone is recharging the aquifer, but it's not making it to the Mulibai. So we would like to establish an in-stream flow standard at a lower elevation to protect all of those in-stream TNC practices and the habitat and Mulibai that are supported by that.
Thank you. Okay. You say we have less rainfall and less water in the streams and aquifer, but you think we can increase the sustainable yield? How does that make sense?
Can you see the question? Oh yeah. Thank you for the question. So I apologize. Part I talked about. I'm not saying we should increase sustainable yield. It was just that kind of demonstrating there's such a different range of recharges, and the Commission's policy is to pick the lowest one unless there's compelling reason. So, I'm not saying it's going to go up. It's not our decision, it's a Commission's decision. Staff makes recommendations, but given the situation, I don't really see that necessarily happening. But we want to meet with the other experts and see what everyone thinks, right? So, yeah. So my apologies if that's what it sounded like. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. So are you taking more water for the hotels in Ka'anapali and houses? How are you going to improve West Maui and help the Hawaiians? So as it stands right now, post-designation, no one should be taking any more water than they were taking when we designated the aquifer. How are we going to improve West Maui and help the Hawaiians? By making sure that water is shared equitably. I mean, that's I mean, it's the simplest answer. I mean, just, we're going through this process, we're trying to protect the public trust uses of water, and in doing so, I hope that West Maui is going to flourish. I really, really do. What is the accountability process for utilities and well owners to report pumping usage for accurate data?
Process for utilities. I don't
Are we
know.
there?
Pump it. So for all users of water that are using wells, we require monthly pumpage reports. And in terms of accurate data, they do need a calibrated water meter, and they need to provide the readings at the beginning and end of the month. So if we wanted to verify that the data is accurate, we could go and look at the meter readings at any given time.
Okay. Next question. How is fire prevention worked into equations and planned for in storage and distribution system? This is more of a question for the county and the water system purveyors. I'm not an engineer. There are standards to calculate what fire flow should be on a given system. Okay. You mentioned traditional and customary practices don't need WUPAs, and mentioned that a good amount of traditional and customary practices filed WUPAs. How will those be addressed? Expediently, as much as possible. I should clarify that the reason that we encourage people to file applications for traditional and customary uses is to make sure that they're accounted for and that their rights are protected. And so while you don't need to file an application per se, we would encourage you to, because it helps us make sure that you're accounted for. And so we'll be handling those a little bit differently, most likely than the other applications. Okay. What are the steps that will be taken to hold those who are abusing their water permits accountable, causing less water for kuleana owners to practice their native rights as kanaka maoli? So if someone violates their water permit, then we will open an investigation against them and pursue penalties. Okay. Is water traveling through the old plantation ditch system? And what is the volume of yield? Are the systems still have a loss of volume? And what is the plan to fix plantation ditch systems?
So the commission doesn't operate plantation systems. Whoever owns them, whether it's the private entity that the ditch system runs across, or the county or the state, it's just not us. Some of the systems are in use. Honokohau Ditch, for example, transmits water from Honokohau Valley at about 825 feet in elevation to the Mahinahina Water Treatment Facility in Honokowai for County Department of Water Supply at about 700 feet in elevation. So that system is very efficient. It's almost entirely in tunnel and all concrete line. Honokowai Ditch is still in use, and it provides non-potable water for irrigation needs in Honokowai. The Kaula Ditch is still in use, and that transmits water from Kaula Stream to a number of TNC practitioners and Kamehameha Schools lessees in Kuia. And then under high flow conditions, some of it gets transferred to Kaula Reservoir. But under low flow conditions, all of the remainder of the water, it's returned to the Kaula Stream at the siphon. Oluwalu Ditch is almost entirely abandoned. At least the entire upper portion of the Oluwalu Ditch. Parts of the lower Oluwalu Ditch are in operation, and then the Ukumehame Ditch has been abandoned, except that a pipeline now transmits water from the stream to the end users in Ukumehame.
Next question. Can pulele hua the housing project, be granted water from the Kahana well if approved through a declaratory ruling. Can CWRM condition that as part of the ruling? So the requested ruling is for existing uses only. Pulelehua is a new use because it's not actively using water, was not using water at the time of designation. So while it is within the commission's power to condition that as part of the ruling, I think the commission, well, we'll see what happens on April 28th. Okay. Are there plans to increase water storage? How does adequate water storage play into the modeling of sustainable yield?
Okay, simple answer. Yeah, answer. Okay, so yeah, for water storage, like I think Aaron mentioned and Kira mentioned, like the commission, we don't own, operate water systems, right? We resource management, but we don't own or operate any water systems. So as far as water storage, if we're talking like reservoirs and things like that, that would, we encourage, water purveyors or water systems like to increase your storage, right? They're regulated by the department, DLNR's engineering division as far as their dam safety program, but you have to follow the rules, but we encourage that. And then what's the other one? Oh, how does storage play into the modeling of, okay, so how does the storage play into the modeling of sustainable yield? Storage will come into play when calculating like recharge. So it doesn't really affect sustainable yield, but it affects possibly recharge, because if you have a whole bunch of reservoirs that aren't lined, they may recharge the aquifer. They'll be seeping in, so that storage may increase recharge. But as far as calculating sustainable yield, maybe indirectly, if there's a ton of reservoirs, you might increase recharge, increasing sustainable yield, and vice versa.
Okay. Are these results of water averages based on rainfall only or combined with current infrastructure and long-term plans for new infrastructure?
So are these results of water averages based on rainfall only or combined with current? I guess the question, if it's referring to water averages, is it if it's water recharging, yes, it is based on land use and land cover and rainfall and how that affects recharge. I'm not sure what that. You understand the question? Anyway. Yeah, you fix that.
If the question refers to averaged uses under current infrastructure and long-term plans for new use, no, I don't handle permits. I think the permit that is being applied for applies to existing use. An existing use permit applies to existing use with existing infrastructure. It doesn't consider conservation measures that might be implemented in the future. I think that's what the question's asking.
Oh. Trees and greenways have been considered beneficial to aquifers and rainfall. Is this in your plan? Yeah, when we talk about tiers of review for water use permits, I think I would strongly consider making a higher tier for more priority for greenways and reforestation projects. But that is an aspect of recharge that would be factored into sustainable yield, but likely we wouldn't start to see the benefits of reforestation and things like that for a while. Okay, regarding expediting affordable housing, Many development projects include a mix of affordable and at or above market rate units, often using affordable units to justify the broader project. In these cases, does the expedited allocation apply only to affordable or the entire development? So we haven't made a decision on this specifically yet, or even, about expediting affordable housing, though it's definitely something that we're considering. The expedited allocation would probably apply to the entire development, not just the affordable portion or the below market portion. Thank you. Okay. Plantation ditch systems show water leakage. What is the process to reduce leakage in private systems?
So the systems that are in use today are pretty efficient. Honokohau Ditch, for example, is extremely efficient. Other portions of the system or systems such as the Honokowai irrigation system that draws water from Honokowai Gulch, maybe less so. We are looking at system loss as part of the evaluation, but we do not invest in infrastructure ourselves.
What will you do about people already building pools or pools that are going to be made? Like I said, I think we're going to have to look at whether or not pools are a reasonable and beneficial use of water in this permitting process. We don't have jurisdiction over people building pools necessarily, or pools that are going to be made. So, I guess it's an investment that those folks are making in an uncertain time, with an uncertain future about whether they're going to be able to get water for it. How many staff do you have, and what is your budget to fulfill your Hawaii-wide kuleana? So we have currently, we have a staff of, what do we have, 20? Because we're bringing on one person. Yeah, we're up to 19. We have a 20th person starting this month, very soon. We have a few vacancies, so fully built out, we would be at 33. And what is your budget to fulfill your Hawaii-wide kuleana? Our yearly operating budget is about $4 million. So it's, we try to do a lot with a little over here at the Water Commission. Why do private water purveyors not need to follow water restriction during county mandated restrictions? The simple reason is because they're not on the county system, and so each of the systems kind of makes its own restrictions to manage the resources that they have available. They do have their own water restrictions that they do put in place based on, what their tiers of shortage are. Long-term, stable, permanent, affordable housing is the foundation for recovery in West Maui. Seeing as there are very few fully entitled community plan approved permanent affordable projects in West Maui, and the County of Maui has dedicated $30+ million and a state proposed project with $35+ million that are now in jeopardy, what can CWRM do in the interim to provide water to these projects, or what does CWRM see as a path forward so West Maui doesn't lose these projects, as we do not need temporary housing, we need permanent housing? Yeah, this is a sentiment that I hear a lot, and we're balancing interests. I mean, I've heard testimony today from people who want more housing and from people who want a moratorium on housing, and those are both important. Those are both important perspectives, and I want to honor both of them. CWRM has tools at its disposal, like declaratory rulings, to allow things like affordable housing to go forward, especially ones that have state and county entitlements. Whether or not the commission makes a decision, the commission, not us staff, but the seven-member commission makes a decision to let those go forward, is really going to be based on the circumstances. It's going to be based on a really hard, close look at what is at play and what are the consequences of either decision. Can part of this process be addressing the waste of the Honokohau ditch system? Could that reduce water diversion from Honokohau stream and add to meet IIFS?
I will reiterate, the Honokawa ditch is extremely efficient. We were in the ditch last week, Tuesday. It was flowing at about 800,000 gallons, 798,000 gallons per day at the intake. What was the county getting? 799,000. So within the margin of error of the flow measurement, the county was getting every single drop that was in the ditch. So it is an extremely efficient system.
Okay. Next question. How does the United States / Hawaii, I assume this means state of Hawaii, claim water rights and that it is a public trust? Maybe this is a reference to statehood and sovereignty, perhaps. You know, water has been considered a public trust belonging to the people since we were a kingdom. And it was allocated between various competing interests, you know, from way back before Hawaii became a state. As far as how the United States claims water rights, that's a long history that, you know, most of you, all of you maybe are aware of, and I don't need to recount here. For me and for our staff, we're doing the best that we can with the history that we have behind us to make sure that we're honoring these rights and allocating water equitably among all of the people who have an interest in it. Okay. Can the IIFS be adjusted if the decision for water use permits for Honokohau is granted? Yeah, we can adjust IIFS because they are interim. You know, we have the ability to adjust them at any time based on the availability of water. You know, it doesn't necessarily depend on water use permits for Honokohau. It might depend on any number of things. Okay. Will the stream flow be affected with increased pumping of the aquifer?
So the basal aquifer that all of these production wells are drilled into does not contribute to surface water. The streams are flowing at hundreds of feet above the basal aquifer, and even a half a foot decline in the basal aquifer, the freshwater lens above mean sea level, is not going to interact with the stream. The streams are hundreds of feet above the basal aquifer. All of these streams that are flowing out as they descend from Malco to Mackay out of the dike zone, they're contributing groundwater to the basal aquifer. They're not drawing water from the basal aquifer.
Thank you, Aaron. I'll answer as best I can. You can clean up. Okay. How is sustainable yield determined is the second part of this question. So Neil presented our sustainable yields right now are determined using the robust analytical model, which is a pretty simple formula. It makes a lot of assumptions, including you know, uniform pumpage and uniform geology that don't necessarily reflect the actuality, which is why we would like to explore moving towards more complex things like numerical models. And it's determined basically, we take recharge numbers and feed it into the robust analytical model, and out pops a number. Of course, as we covered, we tend to use the most conservative number. Thank you. This question is for you, the community. After hearing and learning of our water situation, do you believe that the sustainable yield is higher or lower than what it is now? Same? All right, thank you. Okay, for the tiers mentioned on the slide, it is said that priority is for public trust use and affordable housing. Does public trust use include water to the County of Maui? Okay. I ask because County of Maui provides water to hotels and STRs, short-term rentals, I think that means. And if so, why would CWRM support water to the county for hotels and short-term rentals and wasteful pools? Yeah, good question. It includes some water to the county of Maui. The question is how much, right? That's the most important question. Some water from the county of Maui is definitely going to be domestic use. Other amounts of water might be considered, are considered irrigation or landscaping, and they don't necessarily, they don't have the same public trust protections that water for domestic use has. So, it's not a direct yes or no question. It's some yes and some no. Okay. Are there regulations for private water use systems? If not, why? Well, now that we have designated Lahaina as a water management area, those private systems are going to be regulated. When will you set the IIFS for Honokowai Stream?
We don't have a timeline. That's the short answer. We've been gathering a lot of data in Honokowai over the last 7 years, and we are also looking at the non-in-stream uses of water from Honokowai, which might include future drinking water supply for the county. So there are a lot of moving parts. We're still gathering the groundwater data that is important for understanding how much water is actually available at the Honokowai ditch intake.
Thank you. Okay, I think I counted 10 more questions here in my stack. It's 7 o'clock now. We're going to stay at least until 7:30, and so I guess I got 3 minutes per question. With the increasing salinity of the Lahaina sector, are monthly pumpage reports including chloride level recordings?
Sorry, what was the question?
With increasing salinity of Lahaina sector, are monthly pumpage reports including chloride level recordings?
Yes, monthly pumpage reports always require chloride levels, chloride readings to be submitted to us.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Okay. Why is 77% of our water resource in private control? That's, I think, more of a historical question. Yeah, I mean, now that the area has been designated as a water management area, even those systems that are controlled by private purveyors are going to have a level of state oversight for them. Okay. Good question. R1 question. Since R1, and that's water reuse from wastewater, has been a topic in our community, is the Commission looking into protecting R1 as a public trust resource as well? So currently there isn't an exception in the water code for R1. This is a really interesting question because R1 is going to become increasingly important. There are a lot of people looking into using R1 water. And so it is water. It's a public trust resource in that it is water. The question is, how much should it be regulated? Should it be regulated as much as water that's being taken out of streams directly or pumped out of the ground? And that's, I think the more regulatory burden you put on R1, the harder it's going to be used to use that resource. So we need to make sure that we strike the right balance, and encourage R1 use as much as we can. Go for it.
So R1 currently falls under the Department of Health Regulatory Authority. So all the end uses have to, and the management of any R1 system have to comply with DOH regulations. But we include it as an alternative to an existing use.
Okay. How are you quantifying the input from cultural practitioners in regards to the effect on traditional and customary practices? It was said that the, quote, American system, end quote, doesn't factor it in. Yeah, so the robust analytical model it accounts for a certain amount of discharge to the coast, which is going to feed coastal resources. And then, of course, there are other things besides coastal ecosystems that depend on water. It is a difficult question of how to quantify the qualitative input that we get, and a lot of it is going to be based on, what are the practices that need to be protected, what are the resources that need to be protected, and then what do they need to live. So we're kind of already talking about this in the context of Keauhou aquifer system. How do we make sure that we are counting those groundwater dependent ecosystems when we set our sustainable yields or when we manage our water resources? It's difficult, and we're trying it for the first time. So a lot of it is going to be making sure that we are gathering more data and making adjustments to the way that we manage the system, and kind of doing it in a circular way where we're continually coming back, learning more, and trying to monitor effects that we're seeing on the resources based on what is being withdrawn. Have you guys ever calculated how much water West Maui would have if all residential pool permits were revoked? We, in water management areas, approve permits for the water that goes into those pools, and I've kind of covered that. Have you figured out a way to hold private purveyors accountable for taking too much water? What are the penalties? This is still a question we've been asking for years. Why is DLNR here right now when they should be out protecting our resources? Okay, so the penalties right now are up to $5,000 per violation per day. We actually have a bill in the legislature right now to increase that penalty, especially for repeat violators or those that are causing harm to the water resource or to other users. That is the primary way that we hold purveyors accountable for taking too much water. There you go. Why does Laniupoko get more water for pools than the Ohana Mahi'ai in Kaua'ula? And why should we let them have more if there's not farming for ohanas? That's the way it was when we designated. And it's not necessarily the way that it's going to be in the future. Like I said, we're looking at ways that we can equitably allocate water resources among all of the people who need them. So, like I said, we are going to have to seriously look at, what constitutes a reasonable and beneficial use of water. Please explain why today's presentation covering West Maui water only included Department of Water Supply water use and did not include the information from all private water service providers, instead of explaining to the community that you'll need to get that info later and post it to your website. Hawaii Water Service and Kapalua Water Service has separate water rates for residential, hotel, resort, and commercial. That info should have been readily available to provide to CWRM. I apologize for that. If the gauge reads 798,000 gallons and county received plus or minus the same amount, does it mean Kapalua or Hawaii Water Service is not using any water from Honokohau?
Correct. Kapalua has been shut off, or at least up until yesterday, had been completely shut off in a stage 4 water shortage for, I think, at least 3 or 4 weeks. How long have you been in stage 4? Most of the last few months, let's put it that way. So yes, there was 0 water going to Kapalua last week.
And we've heard about it. Will CWRM require a hierarchy of use be established by the County of Maui? Okay, maybe this means when we go through the water use permitting application, will we look at the County of Maui's water use permit application and make them prioritize certain uses that are on their system? That's more something I think that we would handle through water shortage planning, where, in the event of a water shortage, we would cut back from, certain things like irrigation water first before we proceeded on up the hierarchy to more important uses. When will we set an IIFS for Laniupoko stream?
So there's currently an IIFS of 0. The medium flow for Laniupoko was 0.4 million gallons per day. The low flow was maybe 0.28 million gallons per day. That amount of water is not going to flow very far past the diversion. And as of when we evaluated all the in-stream uses, there weren't any wetland hollow. There weren't any ecosystem services being provided by the stream in that region.
When CWRM approves a WUPA, can they add conditions which require operators, county or private, to limit non-domestic uses like landscaping, pools, etc.? Yes. Ultimately, we approve a certain quantity of water, and we don't necessarily have oversight over what is done with that quantity of water that we allocate. So say, for example, we allocate a certain quantity for domestic use. They could then use that to go do some of their landscaping. But they're going to have to make a decision about what to do with the limited quantity of water that we permit. Okay, final question. Second to last question. Will CWRM be considering sustainable yield versus developable yield? Sustainable yield, despite the name, has extractive connotations indicating the max amount of withdrawal, whereas developable would be the max amount allowed to use in practice.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The way the water code is written, so the definition in the water code says sustainable yield, and whatever the connotation or denotations that it does. So yes, it really looks only at the resource and how much you can use from the resource without impairing the resource, which is the water. Doesn't necessarily look at other uses, or let's say impacts to the GDE or traditional customary practices. So it's a possibility, but it's gonna kind of require a wholesale change to the water code and parts of the code that talk about sustainable yield. So, but that's something we can definitely part of the conversation.
Okay, last question. How long does it take for a complaint or report of overuse for someone to attend/investigate to the report? So, if it's really severe and urgent, please contact DOCARE, our Division of Conservation and Resource Enforcement within DLNR, and they will come out much faster than staff will be able to handle it. If it's directed to CWRM staff, it will depend on our travel schedules and other obligations, but we will come and investigate it, usually within a range of 2 to 4 weeks. But that's what Dean wrote on his part. Okay, well, those are all the questions that we received in writing. So thank you very much for coming out this evening. I really appreciate you being here with us. Safe travels back home, everybody.